everyone, and welcome to the debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. What should have been a routine traffic stop in California left one officer dead, so we'll have the latest there. Plus, we're talking about who will be held accountable now that Jeffrey Epstein has died by suicide. And we have updates on those Hong Kong protests. But first, here are your headlines.
Two experimental treatments for Ebola are now being offered to patients in Congo, where an outbreak has left thousands sick. Scientists now say the treatments have been 90% effective in fighting the disease.
One of the nation's biggest banks says the odds of a recession in the next year are rising. Bank of America now predicts there is a 1 in 3 chance of a recession before the 2020 election, largely because of the trade war with China. The Dow fell nearly 400 points Monday, thanks in part to trade tensions. And there's growing concern about government spending. The U.S. budget deficit is up 27% this fiscal year. The Trump administration has announced major changes to the Endangered Species Act, which will weaken protections for threatened wildlife. The new rules, set to take effect next month, would make it easier to remove species from the endangered list and make it harder to consider the effects of climate change on plants and animals. The changes could clear the way for new mining and oil and gas drilling. Legal challenges are expected. The city of Newark, New Jersey is handing out bottled water because of a growing lead crisis. The city previously provided 38,000 filters to residents who have water flowing through old lead pipes. Despite the filters, tests show some homes still have dangerous levels of lead. City officials have rejected comparisons to Flint, Michigan, insisting the lead issues in Newark are less widespread.
We just need all the lead lines replaced. We don't need them replaced 8 years from now. We need them replaced as of yesterday.
And some residents, including community activists, have long accused city officials of downplaying the problem.
It's wrong, and something should be done about this. This has been going on for a while, and they've been covering it up, and nobody did do nothing about it.
We begin with that terrifying scene on a California highway during a traffic stop. A driver opening fire, killing a police officer, and injuring 2 others before he was taken down. I want to bring in our chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman, with the details. Matt, can you just give us an idea of what happened here?
It started with what seemed to be a routine traffic stop. A CHP officer pulling over a white pickup truck, a GMC truck. He started to impound the truck, doing the paperwork, sitting in his own vehicle. And as the other man, a suspect now known as Aaron Luther, went back to his own vehicle to try to retrieve some personal effects, he also took out a long gun and began firing right on that officer's car. And you can see in these images that pockmarked windshield, how many bullets pierced right in that driver's side area. And that officer, despite being mortally wounded, was able to radio in for backup. Officers started swarming to the area, and it happened about, I don't know, several hundred yards down the road. You can still see the police presence behind me. Officers swarming in, guns drawn, SWAT teams moving in as well. But those first initial officers who came to support the slain officer, some of them were also hit. 2 of those officers being shot, one of them still in critical condition this morning. Finally, SWAT teams and other officers able to neutralize that suspect. They killed him. He died on scene. And overnight, you know, this very sad procession from the CHP mourning their slain colleague. They're still going through the crime scene right now. They are saying it's going to take quite some time to go through it because it is so large. It happened right in the thick of rush hour traffic. Dozens of bullets fired. They have to account for every one of them. And at least one motorist vehicle caught in the crossfire. Apparently, at least 1 or 2 people inside that vehicle hurt by either flying glass or bullet shrapnel. So this is a very significant crime scene. It's going to take them some time to actually sift through all of the evidence here, Kimberly.
Yeah, very terrifying scene that you're at. I just want to know, do we know anything about the officer who died?
We know that he was relatively new to the force. I guess there is no such thing as a routine traffic stop, but he didn't have any reason to suspect that this particular man was armed. But he did know, and it probably came up on his computer, that this man was a felon, that he had served a decade in prison on an attempted murder conviction, also about a decade ago. The man's father said he cleaned up his life, and so this is one of the things that police are going to investigate. How did a felon who should not have access to a weapon get and obtain this long rifle that seemed, at least from the video we've seen, to have been kitted out with some additions? Unclear what its capacity was. We're told that those two other officers who were shot are going to survive, but the funeral for Officer Moya is probably going to be in the next couple of days, Kimberly.
All right, a pretty sad story there. Matt Gutman, thanks for being with us right there in Riverside, California. Thank you for the updates. And we turn to Washington and the ongoing trade war with China. Remember how the president said his administration would slap tariffs on $300 billion worth of Chinese goods at the end of this month? Well, a new announcement says that it will be delayed. So I want to bring in Rachel Scott, who's in Bedminster, New Jersey. Rachel, good to see you. Can you just tell us about this delay and what products it will affect?
Yeah, Kimberly, that's right. It will now be delayed. Those tariffs were set to go into effect in September, now being pushed back to December. The U.S. coming out and saying there was supposed to be 10% tariffs, and it was supposed to be slapped on $300 billion of Chinese imports on September 1st. So those were now being delayed, but it was supposed to create a higher price tag on things like cell phones, laptops, computers, video game consoles, and certain toys and monitors. Of course, many people across this country are worried about these tariffs, farmers especially. The president just tweeted moments ago saying, as usual, China said that they're going to be buying big from our American farmers so that they have not done what they said. Maybe this will be different, but American farmers are certainly feeling the pinch of this, certainly in this ongoing escalating war here. And again, it seems to be no resolve quite yet. Kimberly?
Yeah, so we're talking about tariffs, but on your radio calls this morning, lots of people talking about immigration, yes?
Yeah, that's correct. And, you know, it's great doing these radio calls with our affiliates because you kind of get a tour of the country and get to see what people are thinking across the country. And a question that I got about this new ruling that the Trump administration is moving ahead with is this any different, right? We already know that green card holders, when they apply, are asked if they're going to be a public burden to the United States. They have to prove that. That's what the federal government calls a public charge. But it's important to note here that this new ruling that the Trump administration is pushing actually expands this and broadens the scope out. This includes the use of Medicaid and SNAP. These things were not disqualifying factors before under previous administrations like the Obama or a Bush administration. And so this is why immigration advocates are saying that this is going to affect low-income communities. You heard Ken Cuccinelli yesterday defend this, saying that America prides itself on having people here who are self-sufficient, but other people are pointing towards other American ideals of, you know, give us your tired, give us your poor. That's on the Statue of Liberty. Today, Ken Cuccinelli, in an interview with NPR, said that sentiment and phrase would be better suited if it said, give us your tired, give us your poor, who could stand on their own 2 feet and not be a public charge. So this is expected to go into effect in October, but certainly not without a fight. There are already advocacy and immigration groups that are coming out and saying they plan to take the administration to court on this. Kimberly?
All right. Rachel Scott right there in Bedminster, New Jersey. Thank you. And we want to talk about this new public charge rule. Again, it's a rule that would drastically curb legal immigration by limiting who is allowed to enter and stay in the U.S. based on the person's need for public benefit. So as Rachel mentioned yesterday in a press briefing, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration's chief, Ken Cuccinelli, was asked about the Statue of Liberty plaque. So let's take a listen to what he had to say.
The words at the base of the Statue of Liberty that read, "Give us your tired, your poor." You are implementing a public charge rule for the first time. Is that sentiment, "Give us your tired, your poor," still operative in the United States, or should those words come down? Should the plaque come down off the Statue of Liberty?
Well, I'm certainly not prepared to take anything down off the Statue of Liberty. We have a long history of being one of the most welcoming nations in the world on a lot of bases, whether you be an asylee, whether you be coming here to join your family, or immigrating yourself. This rule will cover, for USCIS, almost 400,000 people a year.
All right, so you heard that there, and I want to bring in Julia Gilad. She's a senior policy analyst with the Migration Policy Institute. Julia, thanks for being with us today. As we mentioned before, critics say that this rule will target low-income communities and communities of color, the communities that would need help.
Yeah, it seems like one of the biggest impacts of this policy would actually be to affect future immigration flows. So at the Migration Policy Institute, we crunched the numbers of who this might affect. And if you look at immigrants who recently got their green cards, immigrants from many parts of the world would have trouble getting through this new public charge test, especially immigrants from Mexico and Central America, whereas it might be easier for immigrants from Europe or Canada or other parts of the world to pass the test.
Yeah, so, you know, there's already a lot of immigrant communities in this country that are living in fear because of illegal immigration policies from this administration. Why is this rule happening right now, do you think?
This administration has been really pushing for changes to our legal immigration policy to move toward a so-called merit-based system that lets in those with the best English skills and the highest educational attainment. And this is really a backdoor way of trying to achieve those legislative aims without having to rely on congressional debate or conversations with the broader American public. Through this rule, they can really change who's able to come into the country.
And just so we know, like, you know, as Rachel said, there's definitely going to be a fight. How are people going to move forward to potentially fight this rule?
We already know that advocates are planning to sue the administration over this rule. They allege that this has a racial bias. We'll have to see how those lawsuits go forward.
All right, Julia Gilad right there with the Migration Policy Institute. Thank you for being with us today. And guys, we're going to turn to the Jeffrey Epstein case. We've been keeping you updated. Lots of questions and an investigation around the registered sex offender's death by suicide. So I want to bring in Aaron Katursky, again, who broke the story of his death and who's been keeping us updated on all of the details. You know, Aaron, now authorities are saying they're going to start looking at his inner circle, and there's expected to raid his apartment on the U.S. Virgin Islands, his home.
Yeah, the FBI and NYPD detectives showed up at his compound, his island compound in the U.S. Virgin Islands, within hours of the Attorney General William Barr saying that any conspirators, co-conspirators, would face criminal charges. And so now they're looking for evidence of others who may have been in that inner circle and who may have participated in Epstein's alleged sex trafficking. Now, remember, these allegations surfaced 14 years ago. So for the feds to go in now thinking they're going to find something useful in that regard seems maybe like a bit of a long shot, but we're told they're confident based on what they found in other Epstein locations, his house here in New York and his estate in Palm Beach, Florida, that maybe something incriminating still lingers.
Yeah, and what about the investigation into his death?
That is continuing on two parallel tracks from the FBI and from the Department of Justice Inspector General. And so far, they've turned up a number of what the Attorney General called irregularities. And really, we're learning of a security breakdown. Jeffrey Epstein should have been checked every 30 minutes. He was not. That protocol was not followed, perhaps because of a chronic condition of understaffing at the jail, maybe because the guards were too tired. We've learned that at least two of them who were on duty the morning of Epstein being found in his cell had been on their 5th overtime shift. And we've also heard that there may have been cameras in the cell block, not necessarily trained on his cell, and there's a real question whether there's any surveillance video that would catch Epstein in the act.
Yeah, it's kind of unbelievable, and I guess the question for everyone is, like, you know, how does this impact his trial?
Well, there's no trial, right? There's no criminal prosecution unless federal prosecutors can find another defendant or two or three. Remember, Epstein was charged with sex trafficking conspiracy. And so that implies that there were others who enabled his lurid ways, allegedly. And so now the hunt is on for evidence that can connect all of those people. Suspicion has fallen on Ghislaine Maxwell, the British socialite, who has been accused of being Epstein's madam. The pressure has to be on her now. But there are others in Epstein's inner circle who victims have said facilitated his abuse of women and girls over the years.
Yes, and you're going to keep us updated on everything that happens, yes?
Will do, Kimberly.
Yes, I appreciate it, Aaron. And of course, the untimely death will no doubt affect the alleged victims. So I want to continue this conversation with Professor Marcy Hamilton. She's the founder, CEO, and academic director of ChildUSA.org. You know, Dr. Marcy, Professor Marcy, you see a lot of abuse trials where victims get to actually face their abuser, and in this case, that's not going to happen. So, you know, what will be the impact of these girls not being able to have proper closure necessarily?
Well, one of the tragedies is that once again, Epstein gets to call the shots. He gets to determine when he exits the scene, and they could have had a moment of reading their statements. But honestly, there are so many people who are either partaking in his system or supporting it. I will be shocked if the federal government does not file criminal charges against a laundry list of individuals. They'll be able to say their piece then.
Yeah, and do you feel like the victims feel like they're going to be able to seek justice since he's absent? I mean, other people might be charged, but do you feel like they think that will be sufficient?
Well, there'll be charges against others, I'm sure, but they are going to be able, especially the ones who were abused in New York, to file civil lawsuits against the estate. And that window of opportunity for them opens tomorrow. I mean, in a lot of ways, the timing is kind of amazing because while they were only in New York because of this window tomorrow, that's still true. And so they are going to be able to sue starting tomorrow. They only have 1 year, but they need to be standing up for justice. The tragedy is that for the victims abused in Florida and New Mexico and the Virgin Islands, their statute of limitations are so short. They have not revived the expired civil statutes of limitations these women need. They won't get justice unless those laws change.
All right, Professor Marcy Hamilton with ChildUSA.org. Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate that. And guys, we've been keeping you updated on the protest in Hong Kong. Thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators essentially shutting down the world's busiest airport yesterday. And today, more than 100 flights remain canceled and things getting a bit violent, all for the fight to maintain Hong Kong's autonomy and reject a bill that would extradite criminals back to mainland China. So I want to bring in Carson Yu, who's right there in Hong Kong with the latest. Carson, can you just give us an idea of what's happening right now?
You're seeing the live pictures right now. The riot police have showed up outside the Hong Kong International Airport. They haven't come in yet. The protesters were moving out onto the streets about 10 minutes ago, and they were chased back inside the terminal. And some protesters have barricaded the front door with baggage carts, making it into a sort of barricade. But the police are arriving now. They haven't come in yet, but they kind of stopped right at the door. It's a developing scene right now. We don't know where it's going to go tonight.
Yeah, it looks pretty chaotic. I mean, it looks like people are rushing and people getting toppled over. Where are you at the airport?
I am actually on the bridges, on one of the bridges near the entrance, where I can see the police running outside. Protesters are shining their laser pointers at the police. And I think a few protesters are making exits right now, but a few of them are every single bridge that I see now. The protesters have barricaded them with baggage carts.
It's interesting because when we were talking to you yesterday, we were looking at live pictures where people were just sitting in the terminal. What exactly happened for it to escalate into what it is right now?
I think the protesters were emboldened by their operation yesterday. The police didn't come in yesterday, and everybody left by midnight. And they saw that they could kind of close down the airport. So they did it again today, and the protesters stayed throughout the night. And actually, they were actively preventing passengers, even with boarding passes, from accessing the departure point. We saw passengers appealing to the protesters, saying that they have a medical condition, a pregnant woman could get past the departure point, and actually in the last half an hour, as the police showed up, those protesters that were barricading the departure point all fled to the front. So the passengers actually rushed towards the departure point and are getting on their flight to wherever they're going.
Yeah, it looks.
So it's been pretty chaotic in the past 45 minutes.
Yeah, it looks pretty chaotic. I don't know if you've been able to check in and see like how the government is responding to this. I know before they said that these protests are, quote, approaching terrorism.
So the Beijing government came out and said that it's approaching terrorism, which is a way for Beijing to condone the police or allow the police to use more extreme measures in subduing these protesters. So by labeling terrorism, it gives the Hong Kong police kind of carte blanche to tackle the situation.
I just have to ask you, so the protesters, I mean, with the paramilitary there, these forces, these officers like at the entrances, is anyone able to get in or get out, or people just stuck inside?
Well, the passengers leaving are going towards their gate. There's a lot of airport security, airport staff, and there's still some tourists here. So it's a mix of media, protesters, and passengers. Right now, I don't think there's much of a way out.
Yeah, so if you're in the airport, then you're going to be in there for a while.
Until the situation clears up tonight.
And then outside,
the police haven't entered the airport grounds yet. They're still outside.
And then outside of the airport, aside from the officers there, are there a lot of other people that have gathered around? Is there a lot of media in addition to you? Like, what's happening?
I think a lot of the world's media is here because in Hong Kong you have the freedom of the press. So the world is watching what's happening tonight.
And then, Carson, just kind of bigger picture. I mean, obviously, this has been going on for 10 weeks, 10 weeks of unrest. And then inside of this airport terminal, it's been 4 days of protest. In your opinion, I mean, do you think a compromise is coming anytime soon? It doesn't look like it.
It doesn't look like it. It's actually the 5th day of these airport sit-ins. And the government and the protesters have really dug in. And it seems like, at least from what I see right now, the protesters they're all gathered here and they're possibly making a last stand.
And just for people who are, watching and just for a reminder, can you just remind us why the protesters have been demonstrating for so long?
So it started with the extradition bill, which was suspended by the government. But since then, this government hasn't formally withdrawn it. That means it could be put back on the table. So since then, because the Hong Kong government hasn't been responding to the protesters have been escalating their tactics, kind of, what do we have to do to get your attention? And they keep adapting, and this airport sit-in and escalation of the airport sit-in is just the latest in a line of tactics.
Yeah, so we're seeing the pictures here at the airport. But Carson, as we mentioned yesterday, things getting chaotic here, but things have also been pretty chaotic all across the city.
Yes. Well, today is mainly focused here, but for the past few weeks, the protesters, the kind of hardcore frontline protesters, have been going around different police stations and besieging it, surrounding it, and attacking it. And then the police have been responding in kind and dispersing them. But the last week or so, I'd say, the police have been using more aggressive tactics. Beanbag rounds, rubber bullets, and a lot of tear gas.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Again, what you're seeing there are thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators shutting down Hong Kong's airport, one of the busiest airports in the world. 100 flights remain canceled, people not getting in or out, and a heavy, heavy police presence. So, Carson, I want to thank you for joining us today. And of course, you're going to keep us updated on how it develops. Thank you. And guys, we move on. You've heard the disturbing stories of sexual assault in sports like gymnastics and swimming, but a new documentary on abcnews.com delves into allegations of sexual abuse inside figure skating, particularly the story of a former competitive figure skater who has just filed a lawsuit claiming he was sexually abused by the once celebrated Olympic coach Richard Callahan. So I was able to sit down with two of the producers to discuss the film, Pete Madden and ABC's Chief of Investigative Projects, Cindy Galley. So take a look.
A number of people reached out to us, former figure skaters, with their own stories about their time in the sport. And one of them was a young man named Adam Schmidt, who trained under Richard Callahan in the 90s and the early 2000s. Adam says, or Adam told us that he was also abused by Richard Callahan in the years after the U.S. Figure Skating Federation dismissed Craig's allegations against him. Adam has since filed a lawsuit against U.S. Figure Skating, Richard Callahan, and the rink where the alleged abuse took place.
And at the time, in 1989, when he first made those allegations, he actually did quite a bit of media. He was on Good Morning America with Diane Sawyer back then. But as he then told Pete last year, he felt like he was just kind of shouting into the wind.
Yep.
That even going on national TV and talking about his allegations of abuse, he just didn't feel like he was being heard.
Wow. So just before we continue the conversation, I want people to see a clip of the documentary so you guys can take a look here.
I feel like I told the world, but in reality, nothing really changed. U.S. Figure Skating just went back to what it always did, working on producing medals.
When I found out that he had reported this abuse, how did this happen? Why 20 years ago did everyone know and do nothing? Because if they would have done something then, I never would be sitting here, and this never would have happened to me.
So I watched the documentary, and one powerful moment for me was when you guys take Adam back to the skating rink, and he's sort of remembering the pain that he felt, and he says it's deeply disturbing, it's unsettling. So I just want to know what that was like to be there with him.
Correct. I've spent a fair amount of time with Adam over the last couple of weeks and months, and I think it's and I think it's clear that what he says happened, that he's been haunted for a number of years by his time with Richard Callahan.
Yeah. And Adam is now suing not only Richard Callahan, but also U.S. Figure Skating, as well as that rink that you saw in the documentary, saying, again, this was 20 years ago, and you guys knew, and yet no one said anything. And so he alleges, had you said something, I wouldn't be sitting here today telling you about my grief.
So what has been the response from all of these organizations about these allegations?
U.S. Figure Skating says that they handled Craig's initial complaint against Richard Callahan appropriately and in accordance with their bylaws at the time. But they've acknowledged that after Craig's report that they made wholesale changes to the way that they handle sexual misconduct allegations. They've instituted a zero tolerance policy, a mandatory reporting policy. They've listed the names of offending coaches and individuals on their website. The U.S. Center for Safe Sport has also taken over sort of exclusive jurisdiction of these allegations within the U.S. Olympic movement. So a lot has changed, and U.S. Figure Skating is quick to point that out in their defense.
And for his part, Richard Callahan denied Craig's allegations back in 1999 when he first made them. And through his attorney now with Adam's allegations, he has said that these are 100% false. There's absolutely no truth to them. And then the rink, where Adam says that he was coached approached and by Callahan, and where a lot of the abuse, he says, happened. They said, you know, Callahan was actually never an employee. He had just rented time on the ice there. And they say that had they known about any of these allegations, either back when Craig had made them or when Adam had made them, that they would have put a stop to it, that they would have investigated it.
So again, you can watch that documentary on abcnews.com. So guys, continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. and then check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And again, if you want to stay updated on all of these stories and headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks, and I'll see you tomorrow.